The Hangout on Air is live. Good morning, everybody, and happy Responsible Travel Week, day 4, Thursday. We are screen sharing, and we'll stop that right now. I'm Ron Motter, host of Planeta.com, joined by friends from across the Atlantic. So, good morning, Ollie and Geoffrey.
Good afternoon, Ron.
Excellent. And
Hi
Geoffrey,
there,
where are you based?
I'm in Brussels, the capital of Europe.
And Ollie, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ollie. I work with Geoffrey and SunX, and I'm based in the UK, just to the south of London.
Excellent. Well, we are having one of those wonderful unscripted and spontaneous chats. Geoffrey, we've been in touch now for about 20 years, I guess.
Yes, you're looking considerably older, Ron.
Thank you so very much.
But I'm glad to see that you're just as passionate as you were 20 years ago. And it's always a pleasure to be able to talk with you because we have always had a common feeling about green and sustainable tourism. So it's good to be back with you.
Okay, excellent. You have worn so many different hats over the years. Now we're in touch through SunX, and I want to kind of break down some of the defining terms you're using, and you use as usual so many. Let's start with the X. For a humble person like myself, what's existential?
Well, it means if we don't fix it, there's a fairly good chance that life on Earth that we've become used to is going to be drastically threatened, and there's a possibility that it will put an end to life as we know. And that's as a consequence. I mean, we refer to existential, we put an X in the name Sun, stands for the Strong Universal Network, because in the discussions that Ollie and I had as we were framing this, we realized that this concept of existential, if one accepts it, and it's not our concept, it comes from the climate scientists, this concept of existential is so significant that all of the other really important issues that people are rightly concerned about around sustainable development generally and sustainable tourism specifically, they kind of fade into meaninglessness if there's something which is so close, like a 50-year time frame, and it runs the risk of destroying what we have become to know as tourism. And indeed, what we've become to know as a usual life on the planet. So we put an X deliberately into our Strong Universal Network name and logo. And even Ollie and I, when we're discussing major issues, how should we respond to the Sustainable Development Goals? The X reminds us that we have to keep in focus. We have to keep coming back to the fact that climate change is existential. And if we don't fix the issues which are creating global warming to stabilize the world's temperatures, then all of the other stuff about poverty, gender equality, life on land, life on water, they just become increasingly unimportant.
And here's the delicate question. This view doesn't seem to be favored by certain politicians. Have we done a poor job of communicating the critical and timely nature of our changing climate, or are we
you've
just going to miss the boat? Are we just going to miss the boat here?
You've done a poor job of electing that particular politician, because until this administration, the United States had been a leader in recognizing the existential nature of climate change, had participated actively in international negotiations with all of the gives and the takes that it requires to bring 190 states together, and everything was moving in the right direction at the Paris Agreement in 2015, and you elected a politician who said, "Oh, that was done by my predecessor. I'm against it. Also, I don't want to put any money into the common pot that had been agreed. Also, I see that I have to stop pumping oil and gas, and that's a big resource for me. So I'm just going to tear this thing up and say, you can worry about your grandchildren later. I'm out of here in 4 years' time."
Such is our post-Valentine's Day 2018.
Look, let me just add one other thing, Ron. I don't think that your administration is necessarily going to pull out of the Paris Treaty. The way the treaty is written, the United States can't actually exit till 2019, as I understand it. And understanding the way that your leader plays international diplomacy, this could well be throwing a time bomb on the table, letting it tick, and then saying, well, what kind of a deal will you give me to be a decent player in the international community? And that's not just a technique in the climate field, it's a technique that is the only technique that's being played.
Well, as that could be a possibility in the future that exists, why is there not a more public stand in favor of this? I mean, is it the contradictory nature? Do we feel like, well, if we're supporting low carbon lifestyles, and you know what, we're just not going to get on a plane, and we're not going to make use of aviation? And how do we reconcile these different?
The Paris Agreement did not say, stop the world, we want to get off now. It was a very wise, well thought through agreement that says we have a time frame of 35 years to fix this problem. So we don't have to stop flying now. We don't have to stop doing the things that are adding to the carbon buildup in the atmosphere now. What we have to do is put in place a plan where every state on the planet, according to its own circumstances, can get onto a new track together. And that track will become increasingly demanding over time. So you can keep flying today, but if you keep flying the same way in 10 years' time, we're in trouble. And if you keep flying the same way in 20 years' time, we're in serious trouble. And that's why we have been saying that amongst the things that people have to do is to put a global initiative, I call it a 2050 no carbon aviation initiative, so that we have a game plan, like putting a man on the moon. Aviation is so important to human activity that we need to find a fix for the propulsion problem. But we've got 35 years to get that fix in place. And in the meantime, we've got a less ambitious plan, which is coming into place in the International Civil Aviation Organization in the next couple of years. So we do have a methodology. It doesn't require us to stop flying. It requires us to reduce carbon emissions from flying over the years and increasingly strongly. And I believe with a lot of money and focus on technology, in 35 years' time, we could have a completely carbon-free aviation system.
Who are the major players in this, or the leaders in getting us to that 2050 goal?
Oh, the big states and the big traveling states. So obviously, the OECD countries, the EU, the United States, and then the growth states, China, particularly, which is a huge player. It I mean, not in aviation, in the use of coal-fired furnaces, in the use of all of the other fossil fuel demanding activity. But those players have all agreed to a game plan of reduction in every area of their activity. And India, players with large populations, and even over time, when you've got 5, 10, 15 years down the track, Africa with 1 billion people, and really the only way that you can move about on that continent is through flying.
Right. I want to get into some of these slides and visually show us some of the work that you're doing.
Ollie's doing the work, I do the thinking.
All right.
How's that, Ron? Can you see those now?
We see that fine, and this is a great screen share. So this is called SunX.
Existential, don't forget it, Ron.
Whether you pronounce it SunX or Sun Existential, or
well, the X is just there so people will say, "What's the X for?" And then we say existential.
Okay, so this is the Strong Universal Network.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is actually a legacy and a tribute to Maurice Strong, who was the father of sustainable development globally, and who was my friend and mentor for 25 years, since the Rio Earth Summit, which he was the Secretary General of. And for the last 25 years, Maurice had a great interest in travel and tourism, and he was the person who pushed me to do things like an Agenda 21 for travel and tourism with the World Travel and Tourism Council in 1993, after the Earth Summit, the creation of Green Globe, the first certification system, CAST Caribbean, Green Globe Asia Pacific, which later morphed into EarthCheck. A lot of these initiatives, they were there because Maurice Strong kept saying to me, it's not enough, you need to do more. So the Strong Universal Network is a tribute to Maurice, who died 2 years ago, a week before the Paris Climate Accord, and that meeting was a testament to what his life had been devoted to, which was to create a culture of sustainable development.
Okay. Very good. Can we go to the next slide?
He's a bit slow, Ollie. You've got to kick him a bit.
I'm sharing the next slide.
And it's not going.
Okay.
So
let me change the sharing again.
Stop sharing and then share again.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, this is why it's not a network TV show yet.
By the way, Ron, Ollie cleaned up his office for this. He had boxes and all sorts of things behind.
Our homes were never our TV studios before.
It's true.
Live broadcast is a new thing for this house.
Impact travel.
Yeah. I really like to share that with you, Ron, because you have been around from the beginning of the whole ecotourism, geotourism, responsible tourism, pro-poor tourism, green tourism, the whole lot. And I'm a believer that all of these initiatives are good things. And there isn't any one size fits all. And when you really look at how travel and tourism is everywhere and how limited these initiatives are, you realize that if we're to get to a place where all tourism is sustainable, we have to have some kind of what I'll call common denominators. And I was raising this question 2 years ago in a small group in the World Economic Forum, where we were looking, the forum had just come out with its concepts of the fourth industrial revolution, which is cyber and nanotechnology and robotics and all of those things. And I was saying, hell, we can't even get our act together to get a single name for travel and tourism. And now we have to move into this new world. And I don't even know what we should call ourselves. And Klaus Schwab was there in that group, and he's a smart guy who was the founder of the forum. And he said, I think you should call yourself Impact Travel, and then you should seek to ensure that the results of travel have a good impact and not a bad impact. And I thought that's not a bad idea. And so we went back and we tossed this around a bit, and we said, if we try to develop a new definition, everybody will go crazy, you know? Everybody loves their own definitions. If we try to develop a new system of measurement, what would that system of measurement be? Is it macro, global, like the great stuff that Susanna Becken is doing in Australia on a tourism dashboard? Is it micro, like you might have with a small hotel with a certification system? Measurement is differing everywhere. So we said, let's try to develop some kind of guidelines that would help the impact of tourism be good rather than bad. So we said, let's have 3 things, because if you have more than 3 things, nobody will remember them. So we said the first thing is it must be measured. The good things and the bad things must be measured coherently so they can be managed so that your good things outweigh your bad things and over time eliminate your bad things. That's the first point. And the second point, we said it has to have green growth at the core. In the future world where resources are constricted, where we're hitting against planetary boundaries, you have to be able to say we're low carbon, we're using renewable energy, we have a good social inclusionary impact, we are linking all of the internet related advances along with the energy related advances. I call it the internet and the internet coming together. And above all, you build it on a nature-based fundament. It has to be resource efficient and it has to be biodiversity sensitive. So if you are looking at those kind of elements, then you're looking at good tourism rather than bad tourism. And last but not least, we said it has to be 2050 proof. Most fundamentally, it has to allow us to meet the targets of the Paris Agreement. You can tell if tourism is going to help towards that by reducing emissions in line with the way that nation states are committing to reduce their emissions. And it has to take advantage of new technology, and that's where the forum's fourth industrial revolution comes in. So we said if we could have a type of tourism which is measured to manage, green to grow, and 2050 proof to allow for innovation, that's the kind of tourism which would be good impact tourism. And we kind of think even the people who are believers in their own system, and there's good people, Harold Godwin with responsible tourism, Anna Pollock with conscious tourism. These are very legitimate forms of sustainability. Geotourism. I mean, there's a lot of them. We think that they could, if they look at this seriously, say these are the kind of guidelines that we think could be followed.
Well, a quick follow-up question and a comment, I guess. You know, there's been the age, and yes, we can both remember it when people were, you know, coining words with the creation of ecotourism, then and the love-hate relationship with that as a term. Then other people came up with terms. And it seems after 20 years that the silos are kind of as strong as ever. And we need to find a way of changing that. And so here's the question. One way of changing that is by being more open. So thank you for participating in the conversation. But is there a way to make some of the data, some of the management, some of the what you're talking about, how open is it? Can we access it, or is this going to be reported annually behind a paywall?
Well, the paywall is always a challenge. I'm a believer like you that we should have more open conversations. One of the things that's always bugged me, and particularly, and I'm not going to point fingers at any organization, I'm tired of seeing fora that are billed as the Sustainable Development Forum. And then you have 3 people sitting on a panel who've paid to sponsor the event, pretending that they have solutions to an issue which they haven't even thought about, all preceded by a 40-minute presentation by somebody who's supposed to know more about this issue than the good people who are working in the trenches. And I repeat, the Anna Pollocks, the Harold Godwins, the Susanna Becken. I think we need to have more open dialogue between these kind of people. And I think we need to make our data readily available. One of the things that we're going to do, we are doing, if anybody goes to our site, which is the Sun Program.com, you'll see that we're building a portal. And that portal is designed to bring in all of the good data that people are producing, and which for the most part, organizations outside travel and tourism make readily available. They don't have e-libraries where you have to buy the books which they've been producing so that the organization can make money from the sale of the books. And we have, for example, collected a whole set of data feeds from people like the OECD, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum. And we've got 20 or 30 sets of data feeds that people can come in and get access to that information. And I think, Ron, the challenge is not so much that people don't share information, it's that there's so much information out there, most people don't actually know how to get it or even that it exists.
Agreed. Can you see the screen now that I pulled up your website?
I can.
So.
Yeah, we try to, honestly, the one thing that Ollie and I are trying to do is to make this as simple as possible.
Right.
And there you have at the bottom the portal, and look at these things. This is just a good example. If you go back to that. Oh, thank you, Tanya.
Okay, 1 second. Just going.
But you know, on the portal, for example, I can tell you, we've got Elon Musk speaking on climate change in an 11-minute session, which he gave at the Sorbonne just before the Paris climate. Now,
right.
who do you want? Who do you want to hear talk about the basics of climate change? You want to hear me or the Secretary General of UNWTO, or do you want to hear Elon Musk? Do you want to hear?
Wait a second. Wait a second. I think we all want to hear you. One quick question on this website. What would you like to show us? What should I pull up?
Well, Ollie, can we get into the portal on this?
We can. 1 second. Let me just change my screen share.
Well,
And by the way, Ron, let me make this point to you. I don't think that our website is any better than the websites that you find if you go and look at Suzanne Becken's stuff from her university in Australia, or if you look at the stuff that Harold Godwin's putting out. These are really valuable contributions, and what we're trying to do is just to add to that information in a way that hopefully people who want to dig deeply will find some useful material. And I do want to answer your question. You don't want to hear me on climate change. You want to hear Elon Musk explain it in 12 minutes because that's really informative.
now there's a point for entertainment and there's a point just for simple connections. Having the website and looking forward to getting a tour, and when we do this again to show us how do we do our deep dive into your website. You know, the web was created to be quite decentralized, and so that we could put information in different places, and also that we could link to it. The big change in the past 10 years, of course, is the rise of the social networks, in which, you know, the conversation is not just as a comment on your blog, but as a comment on Twitter or as a comment on Facebook. It's, you know, the conversation turns out to be everywhere. So my thinking in all of this, and it's reformatting Planeta, the question is finding ways of getting other people's recommendations, their testimonials, and finding a way of participating with them in some of these conversations.
I mean, a simple answer from our perspective is we should have a link to Planeta on our website. And we would really be happy to even have you do some of these sessions with other people and relay also through our website. We're a small number of believers, and if we don't help each other, it's not that anybody's against sustainable development in tourism.
You're glitchy.
What?
I said you were glitchy there.
Glitchy? What does glitchy mean?
In other words, you said it's not that there's people against sustainable development in tourism. It's I didn't hear what you said.
It's like the X in SunX. It's designed to make you ask the question, what did you say? No, I said that, you know, this is a global activity. It's billions of travelers, it's millions of transactions. Everybody is starting from a different position, every country, every community, and we have to bring it all together in some framework. And everybody's kind of trying to make sure that their bit is the bit that is also important. And that is the challenge. It's not that we're not moving, it's that you can't find out the really important things. And that's why I think I was saying we've got to support you and you've got to support us, and we've got to consciously be doing this kind of thing. And when you have these conversations with other people, we should be wanting to show that to anybody who's looking on our website. And we will do, Ron. I mean, that's a commitment that we'll do it.
Well, much appreciated. And remember, you know, it's what we've built this past week. It's not just the link on the website. We were doing that back in the 90s, and that was wonderful. But we have these conversations going on. And even if we disagree or we have a different point of view, all of a sudden that sort of discussion as a comment thread on Twitter or on Facebook is where more and more of these connections are being made. There's the whole field of co-design, where we figure out, again, new and improved ways of collaboration. Now, and I'll say this and I'll shut up. The question that I've had for the past 20 years is, with all of these noble aspirations and all of these wonderful ideas and terminologies, guidelines and regulations and frameworks, you'd never see anyone locally saying these buzzwords. So at the end of the day, the question is, well, has Las Vegas gotten greener? Has Oaxaca become more prosperous for its indigenous and rural, peoples? And you'd have to say, we don't know. We're not really measuring these things. We're measuring, we're measuring the quantity, the butts on seats we're measuring, but the ability to create greener, more resilient and sustainable communities, that's still not being reviewed that well, in my view. So I guess what I'd like to ask is that as we continue our conversations and we're building some of these conceptual blocks of knowledge, again, how do we communicate that with the craps table dealer, or the guy that sells arugula at the Oaxaca market?
Look, I think, first of all, I want to answer this question, but I think you have to step back. When I started at the WTTC, and I was the first employee of the WTTC in 1990, we did not have any numbers about travel and tourism. And you recall, in those days, we got a report from Wharton Economics, which kind of suggested that tourism was 5% of GDP directly, and jobs and trade, and double that if you add the indirects. And we went around and we sort of started to say that in the tourism community, and everybody said that's ridiculous. I mean, the biggest people who were opposed to this were UNWTO, and they said, you're just trying to make the industry look bigger. 20 years later, everybody in the tourism sector says, well, it's 5% of GDP and 10% indirectly. And it takes time for those kind of measuring and conceptual approaches to become the norm. Now, that's point one. Point two, when we started that exercise, there wasn't any sustainable development. It was before Rio. And a lot of these ideas that were there at the time of the Mohunk conference, you remember that, when people came to try to get common standards, all of those were embryonic. Now, 20 years later on, we have a new framework. We have the Sustainable Development Goals, which we didn't have 20 years ago, and we have the Paris climate targets. And these are not just one-time things. These are things, the SDGs are projected till 2030, and they cover everything about life on the planet, 17 targets, 169 indicators, 17 goals, 169 targets, and 304 indicators, and they will be implemented between now and 2030. And tourism will begin to get some markers against those which didn't exist before. So we will have to move into a measuring mode. And the Paris climate talks, you probably don't know this, but climate change is existential. So if we don't fix those targets to get to the right level of temperature stabilization, we'll have more storms, more hurricanes, we'll have rises in water levels, we'll have more floods, more droughts, more migration. And then, of course, all of these issues which you and I, and Ollie actually, Ollie the most, believes in, they will become front and center. Now, I think the thing that we can do, we people who believe in this, is we have to try to get people to see that it should be front and center before the stuff hits the fan.
Beautiful. No, these are the times to develop some sort of a strategy for that. As I'm pointing out, you know, as I'm pointing out, that if you talk about SDGs, you know, that sounds like a sexual disease, and I don't know if global goals is much better, but we have to have these conversations, and I'm looking forward. You know, you asked, you told me about Vicki Smith's article. Am I right, Vicki Smith?
Yeah.
I just know her as Vicki.
Yeah.
But she wrote the one. Go ahead.
No, I know she did this herself, and I was very impressed because she took each of the SDGs and she wrote a sort of blog on each one and its cross relationship to travel and tourism. And I think, you know, this is a really good contribution, and we could have a debate on those issues. I don't agree with every piece of it, but I sure as hell believe it's the right direction. And I would like to see some of that come into the mainstream. I don't need to go to a meeting to hear the same people talk about the same things. I'd much rather get a group of people in a room and say, okay, here is a one-pager from Vicki Smith on goal 13, which happens to be climate change, which, as you know, Ron, is existential, and have a discussion around that issue without prepared speeches, and actually people saying, well, we're going to do this, and somebody else saying, hey, maybe we can work together on that.
I don't know if you can see this. We're opening up Vicki's blog right now.
Yeah, she really, her blog's terrific as well.
And is excellent.
And I honestly, I can say this. I know that Vicki sort of struggled herself to make these interpretations, and I think it'd be great to actually have a series run where we took each one, got a group of us online, took Vicki's position, and had a discussion around it. What can we do? A, is it right? B, if it isn't right, what's the missing pieces? And C, and this is the important thing, I've always believed this, what's the game plan for making it better? You don't have to make it perfect, you can make it better.
Agreed, 100%. Had a nice chat with Vicki yesterday, and again, I think this is the platform in which we can have if we're not breathing the same air, we can have at least a simulated face-to-face conversation, and we can also.
Well, mine's a real face. I don't know if yours is simulated or not.
But we're not breathing the same air, at least not right away.
It's true.
And that's the deal. The question is, how do you have this blended and integrated virtual and physical sort of setup? You know, all of the conferences that I've attended, that you've attended, and you spend more time in the air. You spend more time in the air than you spend at the venue. It's like, that's nuts.
Here's a suggestion. You're going to love this, Ron. I think that you could be a linker. And I think if some of the people who are making donations to worthy causes would take a small percentage and give it to improving your capacity to act as a linker with technology, with support. I mean, a company like Microsoft could up your capacity to link people 50 times, and they wouldn't even think about it as a rounding point on a cocktail party.
Well, I look forward to developing such a proposal.
You've been really consistent, and I'm, of course, I'm on your program, so I will say nice things. But the truth is, for 20 odd years, you've been doing this kind of thing and getting people like me to sort of be very spontaneous. And at the end, people can then judge. Is he spontaneous because that suits his cause? Or is this spontaneous because we actually want to see our industry shift in a green growth direction? We shouldn't grow if it can't be green. And that's not anti-industry, that's pro-humanity.
Well, I hear you and agree with you. And there's a lot to be discussed, you know, here in this chat, as well as in future chats and private conversations. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we end the public broadcast, the public webcast?
No, I mean, just thank you for making this happen. And honestly, we want to be able to support the initiatives that you take in this area. We're not doing it. We're not in competition. So anything you want us to do, anytime you want us to take part in a conversation, we'll do it. And it doesn't have to benefit SunX particularly. It can be something where you think there's a value added generally.
Beautiful. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate it.
Any final words, Ollie?
No, I've been a silent partner in this. It's been a pleasure being part of it, and look forward to much more of the same in the future.
Okay, well, you
Look,
folks stay on.
for those people listening, by the way, who don't know Ollie, you should know that he's not a silent partner. He's a real partner. If Ollie wasn't doing the grunt work, we would just have a neat concept. We actually think we've got something that can help make the transformation. We think we can have a connected set of thinking places in every country in the planet by 2030. And I can commit to you, Ron, that you will be featured in all of them.
Well, thank you, and best wishes to both of you and to your partners and folks, and we'll continue these conversations. So we'll stop the broadcast. Don't hang up yet, but comments are welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks.